Well, I'm glad that we are together today. Thank you all for coming on. Next week, our new fall schedule of worship and Sunday school starts. So next Sunday, this adult Sunday school will be at 10 a.m. and the live stream service will be at 11:15 a.m. So this is the last week that will be at this time. Next week is 10 a.m. for Sunday school and 11:15 a.m. for the live stream. And that 11:15 service will also be in person. So you'll get to perhaps see some of your friends out there in the pews. So last week, we looked at the story of creation, the first 11 chapters of Genesis. These first 11 chapters of Genesis are primeval history, and the character of this section of the book of Genesis kind of has this character of fable or myth or legend, you know, these ancient stories. The characters who we meet in these stories are, they're kind of distant, you know, we don't get a lot of dialogue, we don't get a lot of sense of their personal history or their personalities. They're kind of archetypes of important people in our. And during the first 11 chapters of Genesis, this pattern is set up that continues throughout Scripture until it finally comes to its fulfillment at the end of Revelation. The pattern being creation, corruption, and recreation. So God creates creation good, corruption comes in, God comes with his grace and forgiveness to create again. And so last week we looked at how the story of creation came to its culmination with humans being created with a purpose, belonging to one another, with our identity that is found in God. And then we looked throughout this first 11 chapters at the corruption that happened through Cain and Abel, through the flood, Noah, culminating in the promise that God made to Noah that never again will creation be destroyed by a flood. And so these first 11 chapters are really the origin story of the world, the origin story of humanity around the world and all of God's creation, the cosmos. So then we get to Genesis chapter 11, and the unspooling starts again with the Tower of Babel. All of God's people have come together and they've said, oh, if we can build a towering city, we can be like God. And God says, no, I'm not going to have any of that because I created you to be fruitful and multiply and steward the earth. So God sent them out to cover the face of the earth in Genesis chapter 11, which brings us to a fulcrum point in the book of Genesis. Chapter 12 of Genesis, which we didn't read this week, we kind of passed right over it, but it's there, is a genealogy that acts as a hinge of the book, and it transfers us from this time of these primeval stories where we're learning about the creation of the world and the creation of all of God's people. And then there's this hinge in chapter 12, which is the genealogy, and everything that happens in Genesis after chapter 12 is following the story of one particular family. And this, we come to learn, is the particular family that God has chosen to initiate his recreation, his rescue plan through. So everything that comes after chapter 12, after this genealogy, is more personal. You know, you get a real sense of the characters. You know, Jacob is a scoundrel and Abram is a scoundrel, and you know, you get to learn a lot about these characters and the family dynamics. So the character of the book of Genesis changes at this point. And I bet that you noticed that as you were reading this week. So I want to share with you, is it going to work for me here? Oh, let's go back up. I want to share with you this video from the Bible Project. Will let me do it? Oh gosh, I practiced, and as soon as you bring it on screen share, it comes apart. let me go and grab the video in a different place, and I'll be right back. Let's see. And now I've frozen us all up. Let's try this again. Okay. So these videos that I've been showing you from the Bible Project, these are really great, and they have them on all kinds of topics out of the Bible. So I'm going to show you this one. Let me share my screen again to you. All right. Here we go. I'm going to share this screen to you now. Okay, tell me if you can hear this.
No sound. There's no sound.
No sound?
No, when you share,
okay.
you have to click the two buttons.
Okay. Well, we will just skip over that then. I'm sorry. So
when you share, there's two buttons at the bottom. Before you hit go, you have to check those two boxes.
Okay, let me try this again. Okay. Screen share.
At the very bottom there.
Advanced sharing options?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's just out on the screen just before you hit go.
Share computer sound.
That's it.
Very good. All right. Thank you. We'll try this again. Oh, you all are so patient. I hate this. I practiced, and I know we've all done this, and then it doesn't come for us. Okay, here we go.
These two main parts.
And the first part begins in the garden, where we watch humanity spiral downward in self-destruction, and it ends in the Tower of Babel, where a rebellious humanity is scattered by God.
Then the second part of Genesis zooms in and focuses on just one family.
And right in the middle is this story that links the two parts of Genesis together and helps us understand what the whole book is all about.
So how do we get from the Tower of Babel to the story here in the middle?
Well, after the scattering at Babel, there's this genealogy, and it follows one of the tribes all the way down to this one guy named Abram.
You probably know him as Abraham.
And God starts making all these promises to Abraham, like he's going to bless him and give him a ton of kids. And he says that through him and his family, all the nations of the earth are now going to find God's blessing. So basically, God is trying to restore humanity back to the goodness of the garden and to his original intentions for the world. So it's like his rescue plan for humanity. And that's why the whole second half of Genesis is about this one family. And so you have Abraham, and then he has his son Isaac, who has Jacob, and then Jacob has 12 sons. And to each generation, God renews his promise to bless them and all nations through them.
So because of this promise to use this family to rescue the world, it's pretty easy to read these stories as examples of how to be a good person.
But actually, for the most part, this family is totally dysfunctional. So for example, let's go back to Abraham. This whole story is about God giving him and his wife Sarah a family, but two different times. He basically gives Sarah away to other men by denying that she's even his wife. And then Sarah gets impatient about having a son, and so she makes Abraham sleep with her servant girl, which then causes all of these other problems in the family.
So they get really old, and you begin to think that there's no way they're going to have a kid of their own. But then, miraculously, they do. It's Isaac.
And Isaac, he has two sons, Esau and Jacob, and it seems like things are going pretty good.
But Jacob, the younger brother, wants the family's inheritance, which belongs to Esau, the older brother. So he devises a plan where he's going to steal it from his father, Isaac, who at this point in the story is now old and blind.
Which, who does that? Horrible, stealing from your blind father.
Yeah, and then he just takes off.
So Jacob goes on from there to have 12 sons, big family. But Jacob loves his 11th son, Joseph, way more than all the others. And so he gives him the special Technicolor dream coat. And his brothers, because of this, come to hate him.
So much so that they plan on killing him.
But they don't. They instead just sell him as a slave down in Egypt.
Now, while in Egypt, through this crazy series of events, Joseph goes from being in a prison cell to becoming the second in command there.
And so later on, the whole Middle East falls into this food shortage. And Joseph's brothers, they come down to Egypt looking for food. And then when they get there, who should they find as the ruler of the whole land?
It's Joseph, that guy they sold into slavery. But he actually saves them from starving to death.
And so here you have it. These are the great-grandchildren of Abraham who have done this heinous act to their brother. But God has transformed their evil into something good.
And that's exactly what Joseph says here in the last paragraph of the entire book. He says, you guys planned all of this for evil, but God planned it for good, to save people's lives.
Now, these words, they conclude the book because they actually summarize the message of the whole story so far. Humans keep choosing evil, and we are thinking they're screwing up God's plan, but he keeps turning their evil back into good. And somehow, he's going to use this family to restore humanity back to the garden.
So that's the book of Genesis. But we still don't know how exactly he's going to use this family to bring us back to the garden.
Well, yeah, but this is just the first book, so that's what the rest of the Bible sets out to answer. Hey there, I'm Tim.
And now I'm going to bring up our other one. Don't you love those videos? They're just so, they're great. All right, here we go. Oh. Let me try this again. Okay. Here we go. I lost my picture of all you. I wonder where you went.
It'll come back when you're done sharing your screen, but every time you pop something on your screen, it blocks part of what we can see.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Can you see everybody else okay, or do I need to fix that?
Yeah, they're in little bitty boxes on the side.
Okay, very good. Well, I will just, tell me if you go away, because I can't see you, but I will carry on.
But little cushions on the side.
So I love that now we get the story of the patriarchs. We get the story of this family this is our family. This is the family tree that we've been grafted into. And I think in some ways, the stories we've read this week about a dysfunctional family in a lot of ways, a family that tries and makes a lot of mistakes, is hopeful for us because we're not so different. You know, we try to follow God, as Jeannie was just saying at the beginning of class. We try to follow God, and it's not always easy. We don't always know how, and we don't always know what to do. And so we have this long history from the very beginning, being part of this family that has tried to follow God and not always known how and not always been very good at it. So this week we read the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There we go. And so you can see Abraham, can you see my arrow here? He started over here on the far right in Ur, in Babylon, you know, just at the south part of the Fertile Crescent. And when God said, go forth from your land and your birthplace and your father's house to the land I will show you. This is a massive migration that Abram was being asked to make. And it was for a purpose. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. So Abram was heading over here to Canaan, but he went along a trade route that went along the Euphrates River. So he went here through the city of Babylon, followed the river up, followed the trade route, and he eventually stayed in a place called Haran. a while until God sent him along. And you remember then he went all the way, he went through the promised land and he went all the way to Egypt, all the way to Goshen. And this is where you remember when the first time that Abram gave Sarah away as his sister to be Pharaoh's wife. And so after he spent some time in Egypt, he came back up and he settled in Beersheba, which is here just south of modern day Jerusalem. You can see it's about parallel with the bottom of the Dead Sea, just to the west of the bottom of the Dead Sea. And so this is where Abraham, at that point he was called, settled. He had Isaac by then as his child. And the story that I am really interested in this week, that I want us to talk a little bit about, and then I want to talk about the things you want to talk about too. The story of Abraham being commanded to go sacrifice Isaac. So the giving of Isaac. So Abraham and Isaac loaded up with their donkeys and loaded up wood and went to give sacrifice on Mount Moriah, which you can see is up just to the west of Jericho. Mount Moriah is actually in downtown Jerusalem now, or in Old Town Jerusalem, what is now Old Town Jerusalem. Mount Moriah is what is now the Temple Mount. So Abraham and Isaac went up to Mount Moriah to give sacrifice, and Isaac's getting pretty nervous and looking around saying, where's the ram that's going to be sacrificed? And God said, or Abraham says, God will provide. And indeed, God does provide, and Isaac is saved. The ram is sacrificed there on Mount Moriah. Now this location becomes an incredibly important location for the people of Israel, for God's people, for this family. This continues to be the most important ritual place where again and again and again, God rescues his people again and again and again. God touches down and saves his people. So a few other things that have happened in this place. This is the place that it's thought to be. Melchizedek offered sacrifice to God, perhaps, at Mount Moriah. Abraham offered Isaac. After Abraham offered Isaac there, history went by, and then all the way to the story of David, King David. When David was the king, at some point he decided that he was going to have a census of all the people of Israel. This is the story in 2 Samuel 24. So David imposed a census on Israel contrary to God's will. It's told in the story that it was Satan who caused David to want to do this census. So God regarded this census as sin and punished David and the Israelites. And God gave David three choices. What punishment do you want? Do you want 7 years of famine, or 3 months fleeing from invaders, or 3 days of plague? And David decided he would rather fall into the hands of the Lord's mercy and discretion, and so he chose the 3 days of plague. So an angel from the Lord was sent to spread plague throughout the land, and indeed the plague came through the land. But when the angel reached Mount Moriah, God ordered the angel to stop. And it was at the threshing floor of a guy named Araunah, the Jebusite, that the angel of the Lord ceased the destruction of the people of Israel. So David purchased this threshing floor and built an altar and made a sacrifice there. because of the rescue of God's people from death. Well, it so happens, at least the story goes, it so happens that this threshing floor is the exact place where Abraham was rescued from sacrificing Isaac. So this threshing floor that now has an altar to the Lord, which is a place where God has repeatedly rescued the family of Abraham from death. Solomon went on to build his temple right over that altar that David had made, which is right over the place where Abraham offered Isaac. And in fact, that today, here, this is a picture of ancient Jerusalem, so the old temple. The story is that that altar is right under the Holy of Holies, which of course is now the Dome of the Rock. So that's a very historic place, and I know a lot of you have been there and seen it. Let's see, I'm going to stop screen sharing now because I want to see you all. Which of the stories that we read this week caught your imaginations the most?